Are you ready for a success story? We're super excited today to jump into Ezra. We're starting out in the first 3 chapters, and we are hearing about the release of some of the Israelite people back to their home in Jerusalem. And there's actually a couple of national treasure nuggets here that we're going to look into at the beginning of our reading in chapter 1. But I think it's pretty exciting to finally read a story of success and hope for the future for these people. So we're opening up chapter 1. Ryan found one of our national treasure nuggets that I think is really cool.
Don't even know what you're talking about.
The Cyrus
The Cyrus
decree.
cylinder.
Yeah, the cylinder. There it is.
So this is one of those instances where what the Bible says is confirmed by actual archaeology. There is this actual item called the Cyrus cylinder. Apparently all these ancient rulers like to keep special shapes. In the Cyrus cylinder, it's recorded about how Cyrus went about allowing all these exiled peoples that were living in the Babylonian Empire to return home to their nations to rebuild their places of worship. So Cyrus was actually talked about in the book of Isaiah. Cyrus is talked about in Jeremiah. He's actually called the Lord's anointed, which is interesting.
Servant of the Lord in Isaiah.
So we've been hearing about how Nebuchadnezzar is a servant of the Lord because the Lord used Nebuchadnezzar to destroy Judah and Jerusalem. Now Cyrus is a servant of the Lord because the Lord is using him to restore the people from Judah and Jerusalem. So it's a pretty significant point in history. We've been reading for at least weeks about this exile and this judgment and this destruction. Now we're going to begin reading about the restoration that has been promised this whole time. Now, don't get distracted and think that Cyrus is this really great Christian leader that loves God. The Cyrus cylinder actually talks about how devoted Cyrus is to Marduk, who was a god of Babylon. So he did not care much about the God of Israel. But he did want to allow the people to return to their homes because he was assuming that if he let all these people return to their homes and serve their local gods, they would be more subservient to his rules. So this is kind of a political move, but it's all been orchestrated by the Lord.
So I definitely think he's seeking out that loyalty piece from the people that he is releasing. So it's definitely not that buddy-buddy kind of situation. But then we move into chapter 2, and chapter 2 is really interesting because it's just it's rather boring, but it's interesting to just hear the actual names of those who are just the registered remnants of what is left, or who is coming back of who is left. So chapter 2 is a little dry in that it is simply just talking about who's coming back, who's taking care of what, whose sons were whose still accounted for, basically.
I do think chapter 2 gives you a little bit of a picture of the fact that they are going to try to do it right this time. So it is just a giant list of names. But they do start to talk about the Levites and their roles, who the priests are going to be, who's descended from which people, and what that means for them. So they seem to be paying a little bit more attention to what the Lord requires.
Well, I think it's also important, too, because this is a repeat of what we have read way back when Moses is leading the people and they're taking all these different census whatever to figure out how many are here and how many are in this tribe and how many are this and what are they going to do. And once the temple, well, I guess they have the tabernacle too, so they have to allot the different jobs out to those individuals and making sure they have an account of who is doing what. So this is definitely something we've heard before, and it's interesting too because when they were doing this the first time, they were out in Egypt as slaves. So they're counting up who is left when they were finally released from that foe. So it's kind of that same idea here again, which leads really nicely into chapter 3, which is really exciting. So I in my mind, I just see this group of really run down, super sad, dirty, just completely devastated people that have finally made it out. They're released, they're starting over, and they can take the very little of what they have to just start fresh. And this chapter actually talks about how they're building what do they call it? The base or the foundation.
Well, yeah, they build the altar first so that they can start to worship, not worship, they can start to offer offerings. And then they start to build the foundations of the temple.
There we go. But I think they like after they built the altar, they're like, oh shoot, like we kind of need the foundation of the temple.
It's clear they wanted to restore proper worship as quickly as possible. So they made sure that they were able to offer the sacrifices they were supposed to. They took note of the festivals they were supposed to recognize. Like this people returning to Jerusalem definitely is much more concerned about serving God correctly than anybody when they left.
Isn't that kind of refreshing though? Like, gee whiz, it's been so long since we've seen them actually like at least pointed in the right direction to be like, nope, that's it. This is the very first thing we're doing. We're offering these things. We're making sure the right guys are doing it. We got to like set the tone right away.
I think you make a great observation, and I think there are a few more things that I want to talk about, but what you're saying leads into a fantastic your part. Discipline has produced a proper heart in these people. And so there's many times you could look at God in the prophets that we've been reading and say, oh, this is so harsh. Like, don't you think this is a little over the top? Do you really need to judge these people? Do you really need to carry these people away? But discipline has led the people to repent. It has led the people to remember who God is. It has led the people into proper relationship with God. Was it wonderful and cuddly and cozy? No, it was not. It was pretty extreme and very hurtful. There was a lot of separation, but discipline has produced a heart that desires the Lord. And I think we live in a culture that really works against any kind of discipline at all. And it just allows us to dive further and further into sin and separation.
I actually heard an example of it from a pastor the other day. He was talking about, as a father, what that looks like for him and his children. He's like, I really want to be like, I want to be my kid's friend. Like, I want to be a cool dad. But he's like, ultimately, my responsibility lies with like making sure that they are disciplined, if you will, in a correct way so that they know where the line is and that they know that you don't cross this or this will happen. He said oftentimes what he like or what he sees in himself or what he sees in other people is that if he's not willing to discipline for the wrong things that are like black and white, no, you don't do this. If he doesn't correct that, he oftentimes says, I'm not loving my kids. I'm loving myself.
Yes.
Because I want to be like the cool, whatever. I want to be permissible of all things, but ultimately you're not loving your kids. You just want to love yourself or have them love you for like
make your life a little
reasons.
Bit easier.
Right. It's so interesting.
I saw a quote recently that said, people that tell you what you want to hear love themselves, and people who tell you the truth love you. And so this is what God is doing. And I think I've just said that, like our culture really works against discipline. I think a lot of our church cultures are really against discipline. We think we can just like ignore sin or hope that sin goes away or just love people into submission, which works sometimes. But discipline is one of those things that is significant in the life of a community committed to Jesus. We have to call each other out. We have to submit to calling each other out. I know one of the things that would drive me crazy, this might be too much, but one of the things that would drive me crazy as a youth pastor is when you could see like clear sin issues in somebody's life and start to work toward resolving those sin issues and then have people that are just furious that you would even bring it up. So like when you get to know people, you get to know them pretty well, and you get to know their strengths, you get to know their weaknesses, you get to know their gifts, you get to know their sins. And your pastor hopefully is helping you understand the faults that are in your life and understand the ways that you are falling short of the Lord. If your pastor's not doing that, he's not being a shepherd for you. And so it would always frustrate me when people would be so deeply hurt and so deeply offended by just like calling out sin in kids' lives because they were trying to just ignore it or trying to hope that it would go away. And this was not extreme situations. So I think Ezra shows us what well-done discipline does. It produces people who love the Lord and want to follow him. And we should welcome discipline in our own lives, and we should encourage discipline in others' lives when we're seeking the Lord. I'm not talking about people that are trying to manipulate you or, get something out of you. I'm just talking like really loving each other and pushing people closer to Jesus. Another interesting thing that comes out of discipline is the end of chapter 3. There's this interesting note that as they're laying the foundations of the temple, some people are shouting a shout of joy, and the old men are shouting like a wail, like a cry, like a sadness. Because when you do go through discipline, you realize how much the sins of your life have affected like your prior life.
Well, I think that weeping is interesting too, because these would have been men that would have seen the temple beforehand.
They saw it.
So my initial thought was like, oh, maybe they're just so sad because it's not the same as what it used to be. And I think that's true.
Oh, it's
but I think
true.
Another part of it is like, I wonder how much of that they are feeling the weight of, because they would have been like that first experience of exile.
Yeah.
Like they were in the thick of why they had to be exiled in the first place. So maybe like a lot of remorse and regret, but also just like sadness for what they had and could have kept.
It's widely understood that this second temple is a good thing, but it was much less glorious and much less grand than the first temple. And there is shame associated with that. And there is guilt associated with that. So there is forgiveness that comes through discipline, but oftentimes there are scars. And those scars remind you of where you should be going and what you should be doing. And so that's your part for today. I think discipline is a good thing. I think ultimately we serve a God of restoration. We are getting to see here in Ezra that he is bringing his people back, just like he said he would do. So I'm excited to continue through this book. We'll be back again tomorrow looking at Ezra 3-6. We'll see you then.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.